She spoke with a softness that felt dangerous, like truth wrapped in silk. I thought I was ready for her calm, her warmth, her quiet smile, but when she looked at me and said, "You're not ready for what my heart holds," I realized love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the silence that changed everything. I didn't notice her because she was the loudest in the room. Quite the opposite. She had that rare, kind of quiet presence that draws you in without asking for attention. It was late afternoon, golden light spilling through the cafe windows, painting the air with warmth. I was there to work, earbuds in, pretending to be busy. But when she walked in, everything seemed to slow down just enough for me to notice her. The way her scarf slipped slightly from her shoulder, the calm rhythm in her steps, the soft sigh she let out as she sat by the window. She wasn't young in the way most people define it. Not the kind of beauty that shouts, but one that lingers. Her eyes held stories, unhurried and deep. The faint lines around them only made her smile look more genuine, more earned. She carried herself with the grace of someone who had been through storms and learned to walk through them without losing softness. I remember how she ordered her drink, her voice barely above a whisper, yet every syllable landed clear and steady. It wasn't the words that caught me, but the tone, patient, kind, as if she'd spoken 1,000 gentle goodbyes in her life and learned how to make peace with them. When she looked my way, I did what anyone does when caught staring. I pretended to check my phone. But something about that fleeting eye contact left a trace on me, like a mark I couldn't rub off. There was curiosity there, maybe recognition, or just the kind of awareness that passes between strangers who somehow sense they'll cross paths again. I tried to focus on my work, but the sound of her laughter, soft, restrained, almost private, drifted across the room. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a quiet melody that seemed to hum against the background noise. I caught myself wondering what kind of things made her laugh like that, and more dangerously, whether I could ever be one of them. When she stood to leave, the sunlight caught her hair, and for a brief moment, she looked like something the world had paused to admire. As she passed my table, the faint scent of vanilla and old books lingered in the air, subtle, nostalgic. She glanced at me once more, the corners of her mouth turning upward in a knowing half-smile, and then she was gone. It should have been nothing, just another ordinary afternoon. But something in me knew it wasn't. There was a quiet pulse left behind, a strange restlessness that made me look toward that empty chair more than once. I didn't even know her name yet, but somehow I already felt the pull of her presence. And though I didn't realize it then, that was the moment my calm began to unravel, one gentle smile at a time. It took me a week to see her again. The same cafe, the same window seat, almost as if time had waited for her return. This time, I didn't pretend not to look. There was something about the way she stirred her coffee that made the moment feel like an invitation, unspoken but unmistakable. I walked up to her, every step feeling heavier than it should have. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked up slowly, her eyes warm but guarded, the faintest smile touching her lips. "It is now," she said. Her name was Elena. She said it like she didn't expect me to remember, but I did, immediately, completely. There was something in the way she spoke that made simple words feel deliberate, textured. Her sentences carried pauses that invited you to sit inside them, to think. At first, our talk stayed safe: books, travel, small things that strangers exchange before the walls come down. But there was a quiet current between us, something I couldn't quite name. She listened with full attention, her gaze steady, her fingers occasionally tracing the rim of her cup. I remember how her bracelets would clink softly when she moved her hand, such a small detail, but somehow it anchored me in the moment. When she asked about my work, I told her I wrote. Nothing special, just small freelance pieces. She tilted her head slightly, studying me as though weighing whether to believe me. "Writers," she said softly, "have a way of feeling things too much. That's both their gift and their curse." Her words lingered. I wanted to ask how she knew that, but the look in her eyes told me she'd lived it. We talked until the cafe began to empty. The city outside had dimmed into soft blues and streetlight gold. When she laughed, I noticed she covered her mouth, as if laughter was something she'd learned to keep private. When she grew quiet, the silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt alive. As we stood to leave, she adjusted her coat, her hand brushing against my arm. A light, accidental touch that still managed to send something warm through me. She noticed, too. For a heartbeat, her hand lingered just a fraction longer than it needed to. Then she pulled back with that same gentle smile, the one that seemed to say more than words ever could. Outside, the evening air carried a crispness that made every breath feel too clear. She looked at me, the wind catching a strand of her hair, and said softly, "You notice things most people don't." I didn't know what she meant, not really. But as she walked away, I found myself replaying her voice in my head, the warmth, the calm, and that subtle undertone of distance. It was in that moment I realized something quietly dangerous. I wasn't just noticing her anymore. I was beginning to care. The days that followed blurred into a gentle rhythm, the kind that only two people who understand silence could create. Elena and I began to meet without planning it. Some days, it was the cafe again. Other times, it was the park across the street, where she liked to sit beneath a tree that leaned just enough to offer shade without stealing the light. Our conversations had grown softer, slower, as if neither of us wanted to disturb whatever fragile understanding was forming between us. We didn't talk about love or attraction. We didn't need to. It was there in the small things. The way she'd hand me her cup when she'd finished her drink, trusting me to know she wanted another. The way she'd listen when I spoke about things that didn't matter, as though every word deserved her full attention. One afternoon, she told me she used to teach music. "Children mostly," she said, eyes wandering to the distance. They always played too fast, as if the song would run away if they didn't chase it. Her fingers moved subtly as she spoke, mimicking a melody I couldn't hear. "Sometimes," she added, looking back at me, "you have to let silence do the talking." Her words stayed with me. Let silence do the talking. I realized that's exactly what we were doing. Our silences said what neither of us dared to voice. There was one moment, though, that changed everything. We were walking back from the park, the late afternoon light turning the world amber. She was telling me about her favorite place to read, an old bookstore tucked behind a flower shop, when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. I turned to her, and for a second, she looked almost lost, as if caught in a memory she hadn't meant to share. I asked if she was okay. She nodded, then smiled, a small, tired kind of smile. "You remind me of someone," she said quietly. "Someone I used to know when I was younger. He made me feel like time wasn't chasing me." There was a tenderness in her tone, but also a sadness that settled like dust in the air between us. I wanted to ask who he was, what happened, why her voice sounded like goodbye, but I didn't. Instead, I just stood there beside her, close enough that our shoulders brushed. For a moment, she didn't move away. The warmth of her arm against mine felt impossibly steady. Then she exhaled slowly and whispered, almost to herself, "You're kind. Too kind, maybe." The words weren't meant to wound, but they did. Because underneath that softness, I heard the truth, a quiet warning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her looking away, heard her voice echoing inside me. "You remind me of someone." It was then I understood what she'd meant from the beginning. There was something she was holding back, something she thought I wasn't ready for. And now, I wanted to know what it was, even if it hurt. There are silences that comfort you, and others that start to ache. Elena's silence had begun to change. It wasn't distance at first, just pauses that lingered too long, glances that broke too soon. We still met at the cafe, still shared quiet walks, but something inside her seemed to be retreating, like a tide pulling away before a storm. That evening, the air was heavy with the promise of rain. We sat outside, her coat draped loosely around her shoulders, the scent of coffee and petrichor wrapping the moment in something oddly intimate. I remember asking her if she was all right. She smiled faintly, eyes lowered, tracing circles on her cup with her thumb. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice lacked its usual steadiness. I wanted to believe her, but I'd learned enough about her by then to know that "I'm fine" from her didn't mean peace. It meant "don't ask me yet." We watched the sky turn gray, thunder rumbling somewhere far off. When a drop of rain landed on her hand, she looked at it as though it had caught her off guard. "Funny," she murmured, "how something so small can carry the whole sky." I didn't know what to say. So instead, I just watched her, the way she seemed caught between the present and something she couldn't let go of. She caught me staring, of course. She always did. But this time, instead of smiling, she sighed. "You look at me like you're trying to understand something that isn't yours to carry," she said gently. Her words stung a little, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I was trying to understand her. Every word, every silence, every subtle shift of expression. I was trying to read her like a story that didn't want to be told. When the rain finally started, she didn't move. She let it touch her face, her hair, her coat. I moved closer, holding my jacket above her like a shield. She laughed softly, that same quiet laugh I'd missed. "You'll get soaked," she said. "So will you," I replied. For a moment, our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us. She reached out and brushed a raindrop from my cheek, her fingers lingering just long enough to make my chest tighten. The rain around us blurred the world into soft edges, and for a second, it felt like we were suspended outside of time. Then she whispered, almost trembling, "You shouldn't get too close to me." I wanted to ask why, but her expression stopped me. It wasn't rejection. It was fear. When the rain grew heavier, we ran for cover beneath the cafe awning, both laughing breathlessly. But even as we laughed, I could see it, that sadness in her eyes, like she was already mourning something we hadn't even begun. That night, I understood the truth she'd been too kind to say out loud. Her heart wasn't empty. It was guarded. And I was standing just outside its gate, knocking softly, waiting for her to let me in. The next time I saw her, the sky was clear again, but something in her had changed. The lightness that once sat quietly in her presence had dimmed, replaced by a kind of stillness that felt rehearsed. She greeted me with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile people use when they're trying to hold themselves together. We sat by the window, the same spot where we'd first met. The cafe was quieter than usual. For a while, neither of us said much. There was no tension, just the soft hum of awareness, the kind that tells you something important is about to surface. Finally, I asked, "Elena, what are you afraid I'll find if I get close?" She looked down at her hands. "You think everything broken needs fixing," she said softly. "But some things are meant to stay unfinished. They remind us that we lived." I didn't answer. Her words carried the kind of truth that silences you. After a long pause, she continued, her voice quieter this time. "I was married once." Her fingers twisted gently around the edge of her scarf. "He was older, kind, patient. We built a life together. But when he got sick, I stopped being a wife. I became a caretaker, a nurse, a memory keeper. And when he died, I didn't know how to go back to being a woman again." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. There was too much dignity in her sorrow. I felt something inside me twist. Not pity, but a deep ache to take that pain and make it lighter, even if only for a moment. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. She shook her head. "Don't be. It's been years. People think grief fades with time, but it doesn't. It just learns how to hide." Her gaze lifted to meet mine, then steady and fragile all at once. "You remind me of who I used to be before everything got heavy. That's why I keep pushing you away, because I like how I feel around you, and that scares me." There it was, the truth she'd been carrying beneath all that grace. I didn't speak. Instead, I reached across the table, letting my fingers brush hers. She didn't pull away. Her hand was warm, her pulse steady beneath my touch. We sat there like that, two people caught between past and possibility. When she finally did pull her hand back, it wasn't rejection. It was restraint. She smiled softly and whispered, "You don't know what my heart holds." It's not light. It's years of loss, of learning how to love carefully. I wanted to tell her I wasn't afraid, but the way she looked at me made me realize she wasn't warning me for her sake. She was warning me for mine. As I watched her walk away that evening, her words echoed in my mind, quiet but certain. "You're not ready for what my heart holds." And for the first time, I wondered if she was right. It was late when she called. Her voice was steady, but there was something in it, a gentleness I hadn't heard in weeks. "Are you still awake?" she asked. I told her I was. "Good," she said after a pause. "I could use some company. Nothing serious, just company." When I arrived, the air outside her apartment smelled like rain again, that same scent that had followed us since the night under the cafe awning. She met me at the door wearing a long cardigan and that quiet, composed smile that always seemed to carry both invitation and warning. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. There were books stacked neatly by the window and a record player humming softly, spinning a slow, melancholic tune. I noticed a half-empty glass of red wine on the table. She gestured toward the couch. "Sit," she said. "I don't feel like talking much tonight." So I didn't. I just sat beside her while the music filled the silence. She leaned back, her eyes half closed, the faintest sigh leaving her lips. For a moment, neither of us moved. There was no need to. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. "Do you ever feel like you've been waiting for something you can't name?" I nodded. "Every day." She turned her head toward me then, her expression unreadable. "That's what this feels like," she said softly. "Like I've been waiting for something I shouldn't want." The air between us shifted. She reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers brushing her cheek in that absent, graceful way she had. I could feel the space between us tightening, not closing but holding its breath. I told her she didn't have to explain anything. She gave a small, grateful smile. "I know," she said. "That's the problem. You never ask me for more, and somehow that makes me want to give you everything." Her hand found mine, slow, deliberate. The touch wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. Her fingers traced the lines of my palm, as if memorizing something she knew she shouldn't. My heart was beating too fast, but I stayed still. When she leaned her head lightly on my shoulder, I didn't move. I just listened to the rhythm of her breathing, the faint sound of rain against the window, the low hum of the record spinning in the background. She whispered then, so quietly I almost missed it, "I don't know how to let someone love me again." I turned to her, and she met my eyes, tired, honest, open. "Then don't think about love," I said softly. "Just let yourself be seen." She smiled, a fragile, trembling thing, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. We stayed like that for hours, not speaking, not daring to move too quickly. It wasn't a confession or a promise, just the beginning of something real, held gently in the quiet space between two people brave enough to stop hiding. Morning came slowly, like it didn't want to interrupt us. I woke before she did. Not because I meant to, but because silence has its own gravity when the night has held so much. Elena was asleep on the couch, her head tilted slightly toward the light filtering through the curtains. There was something heartbreakingly peaceful about her like that, the kind of calm that only comes after years of holding everything inside. I didn't move. I just watched her, the steady rise and fall of her breathing, the faint curve of a smile at the corner of her lips. For once, she looked unguarded, free, and in that stillness, I realized something I hadn't before. I didn't want to save her. I just wanted to stay in whatever space she allowed me to. When she stirred, her eyes met mine almost immediately. There was no surprise there, only that quiet understanding that had defined us from the beginning. "You're still here," she said softly. "I didn't want to leave," I replied. She sat up slowly, wrapping her cardigan around herself, and for a long while we just existed in that unspoken warmth. Then, almost shyly, she asked, "Do you ever wonder why people meet when they do? Why not earlier or later?" I thought about it. "Maybe timing isn't about luck," I said. "Maybe it's about readiness." That made her smile, a real one this time. "You sound older than you are. Only when I'm around you," I admitted. She reached for her mug from the night before, now cold, and held it between her palms as though warming her hands on memory. "When I told you that you weren't ready for what my heart holds," she began, her voice low and certain, "I wasn't protecting myself. I was protecting you." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "My heart isn't light," she continued. "It remembers too much. It carries people who are gone, moments that never got a finish, and dreams that had to grow old quietly. It's not something I offer easily, but you've been patient enough to see it without trying to own it. She looked at me then, really looked. And that's what love should be, isn't it? Not taking, not fixing, just seeing. The sunlight had shifted by then, laying gold across her face. Without thinking, I reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly into my hand, a small gesture, but it said everything words couldn't. "I'm ready," I whispered. Her eyes softened. "So am I." She took my hand then, threading her fingers through mine, and for the first time, I felt the quiet weight of everything she'd been holding, not as a burden, but as something sacred she was finally willing to share. There was no dramatic ending, no sudden kiss, no grand promise. Just the two of us sitting there in the morning light, letting the silence speak for us, a silence that no longer felt empty, but whole. That was how I learned what her heart truly held. Not pain, not fear, but courage, the quiet kind, the kind that chooses to love again.